Across the world, we currently have a lot of broken economic systems. An important question we want to answer is, which economic system should we fix first? Which one should be the main priority? That's what I'm going to talk about today. In previous videos, I talked about the issues with land, money, organizations, and government. I'm going to compare these economic systems and how we can approach fixing them. The most compelling solutions that I've mentioned before to fix our economy included land value taxes, deflationary demerge money, temporary shares of ownership, and overhauling our existing governments with better taxation approaches and better operational systems and democratic systems. If you haven't watched my video series talking about these economic systems, you should pause this video and go watch the Understanding the Economy video playlist. That will get you up to date to understand the problems with these different economic systems and why these solutions that I just mentioned can help to fix them. To work out which economic system we should fix first, we need to think about why it might make sense to start with one or multiple systems, as well as what difficulties might exist when trying to fix any particular system. That should help us with thinking about which of these economic systems to prioritize in the short term. Let's start with land. One reason you'd want to consider prioritizing land is it's a very valuable asset. The tax income that can be generated from land value taxes can eventually fund a meaningful amount of a government's budget. A growing number of people are also somewhat already familiar with the idea of a land value tax. There's already a moderate amount of support for this tax amongst politicians across different countries. And you can also find a lot of content online about land value taxes. This factor should help with making it easier to persuade more people that a land value tax should be adopted. The difficulties with starting with land is it needs to be done slowly. You can't just start taxing the full rental value of the land overnight. A reason for this is that some people would have just invested into properties and new ventures. It would be unfair to a group of people to greatly change the tax system too quickly. And some people own a large amount of land with their house, but they aren't making any income from this land. So this tax could force them out of their home, and they may have lived in this home for a long time, or even their entire life. It makes sense that a land value tax is introduced gradually, starting small and growing it over time. Another short-term problem is the complexity around doing land valuations. If this is poorly implemented, it could result in a lot of pushback from the wider community. Governments will need to fairly value the land as accurately as possible to try and avoid this from happening. One short-term solution to this is to potentially adopt property taxes. This can make it easier to get started with capturing some of the value of the land. The property tax could then be updated over time to focus more on land rather than the property value, once more tools are developed that can help with valuing land. Finally, the other obvious problem with land value taxes is the pushback you would expect to see from people who treat land as an investment and have invested a large amount into land. Now, this isn't really a good justification to not adopt land value taxes, but it's just something that could slow down its support and adoption. Next up is money. A reason that we really want to fix money as soon as possible is due to the amount of damage that inflationary money is causing. Inflationary money increases asset prices, which leads to increases in wealth inequality. Asset holders are benefiting from asset price increases, which makes it more expensive for others to purchase those assets. And this is coupled with the problem that wage growth commonly stagnates behind the rate of inflation. A money tax could generate a meaningful amount of income, but it's likely less than a land value tax would generate. For instance, the United States money supply is worth over $20 trillion. So with a 3% rate of demerge, that would be $600 billion. A conservative estimate of the land value in the United States is around $30 trillion. Taxing the full rental value of the land could generate over $1 trillion in tax income. Another reason it's appealing to fix money as soon as possible is the opportunity to adopt Web3 systems. And these will make it easier to integrate money, payments, and finance into a range of new use cases and applications. Crypto and Web3 networks are already experimenting with lots of new ideas for how we can use and manage things like money. Money taxes could be adopted by first launching stablecoins on these networks and then migrating from our old centralized systems onto these decentralized alternatives. The existing fiat monetary system is not built on modern technology, so it's hard to believe that you'd be able to easily fix the existing monetary system and implement something like the merge and money taxes using the platforms and technology that is being used today. Which leads us to some of the challenges of implementing money taxes. It's difficult to implement a demerge based system alongside an inflationary fiat money system. If a demerge system was taxing you a small amount periodically and another fiat system isn't, and they were both using the same fiat currency, well, you wouldn't use the demerge system, as then the money would be both losing value due to inflation, and you also would be losing money due to the small tax amount that's happening periodically. So, changing the system from an inflationary storable money system into a deflationary demerge one is likely not a slow and gradual change. You need a system where you can suddenly switch from being an inflationary and storable money system into being a deflationary and demerge money system. So, in practice, there's likely two steps to fixing money. The first is the adoption of stablecoins, which will use the same fiat money, but now it's available for use on Web3 networks. This can be done gradually over time, but the rate of adoption could also be very high. Once a large amount of the population are familiar with stablecoins and they are using these new solutions, the fiat money can be updated to adopt a money tax. This would likely mean abandoning the old implementation of fiat money and fully embracing Web3 technology as the infrastructure for maintaining and using money. Another obvious problem with the adoption of demerge money using a money tax solution is that very few people understand the problems with money. There aren't many people that understand why demerge is an important solution for fixing money. There's not a lot of content about demerge and understanding money online. So you can only imagine there could be a moderate amount of pushback from people who disagree with this new system that doesn't yet make sense to them. However, this problem around education doesn't need to be solved immediately, as the first step to fixing the fiat monetary system is to properly support and adopt stablecoins. Let's think about organizations. A good reason to focus on organizations as soon as possible is due to the excessive amounts of unearned income that shareholders can receive due to perpetual shares of ownership. The existing share structure can be particularly problematic for excessive unearned income within large international corporations. Perpetual shares never lapse or expire, so shareholders can benefit from price appreciation and dividends in perpetuity. Another reason why you might want to focus on organizations is the total market cap for publicly listed companies is over $100 trillion. So fixing the problems of unearned income for organizations could create pretty meaningful outcomes for improving the distribution of compensation across contributors that are involved in operating these organizations. The challenge with making changes to organizations, especially international ones, is that they can move around. These companies are often set up as legal structures in multiple jurisdictions. So trying to enforce a change which means they can't use perpetual shares of ownership in one country doesn't mean that other countries are also going to adopt that solution. You likely need agreements across many countries to enforce any change. An alternative approach is to support solutions that help to create an environment where these existing organizations can be replaced with better alternatives. The adoption of Web3 technology or using incentives to migrate towards different ownership structures like worker cooperatives appear to be some of the more compelling approaches rather than trying to tear down existing organizations. Realistically, it could be pretty hard to change many organizations in the short term. But you can at least start to incentivize and support the gradual adoption of better ownership structures and Web3 solutions. We can now finally move on to thinking about government. Governments, generally speaking, need to overhaul a large amount of their systems. which is one reason to prioritise governments so that they are being operated more effectively. Fixing governments and the approach to taxation is tightly linked with the adoption of land value taxes and money taxes. Governments will be actively involved in the adoption of either of those tax solutions. So one part of fixing governments that could be prioritised is the adoption of land value taxes and money taxes. This eventually helps with the reduction and removal of other distortionary taxes like on labour, company profits, and property development. So for some of these tax changes, this is a great starting point for fixing government. However, a reason that governments aren't a compelling focus point for overhauling some of the operational and democratic systems is that they are often very slow. Governments have rarely been at the forefront for the development or the adoption of new technology when compared to privately owned organizations. There's a risk that it would be fairly slow to try and fix governments as the initial focus point due to how they currently operate. Instead, it might be more effective to focus on external solutions like the development of Web3 networks. Solutions from these emerging networks could be highly promising and then be adopted more rapidly to improve governments in the future. Taking all of this into account, which systems do I think we should focus on first? Land, money, organizations, or government? Land seems to be one of the most compelling starting points to me. Any country could get started with introducing a land value tax whenever they're ready to do so. And if they don't want to solve the land valuation problem in the short term, they can at least start with property taxes and keep refining the tax to incrementally focus on land value over time. There's already a number of countries that have adopted some form of land value taxes that others can take inspiration from, like Taiwan, South Korea, Denmark, and a number of others with varying implementations. The other really important economic system to fix as soon as possible is money. This is the other most compelling economic system to initially focus on. Stablecoins are a great place to start, which will help to move fiat money on chain using Web3 networks. Governments look like the third most compelling area. Taxation is the most obvious starting point, as the adoption of land value taxes and eventually money taxes will both mean changes to government taxation. But eventually, it is the adoption of Web3 networks that seems to be the most compelling for speeding up the adoption of new systems for handling democratic elections, operating government services, and using more self-sovereign identity solutions. The adoption of stablecoins in Web3 networks should lay the right foundations to encourage and support further innovations that could then be more easily adopted in governments and wider society. Web3 technology will likely play an important role in updating the systems that are used in government. Finally, I think organizations are likely the hardest thing to change in the short term. What can be done is the introduction of incentives and policies that encourage the adoption of collective ownership structures like cooperatives. But that won't fix anything overnight. Web3 networks, again, could help with creating solutions that eventually result in the replacement of some companies that exist today. For instance, a decentralized marketplace could eventually diminish the need for something like Amazon. Though, as you can imagine, that's not happening anytime soon. So the other economic systems seem like better starting points, as the adoption of things like stablecoins and Web3 technology will eventually lead to changes in how organizations are governed and operated. To wrap up, land and money are the two most compelling starting points. And the great thing with adopting Web3 networks for the use case of stablecoins is how it can then help to support the development of Web3 solutions that will eventually help with making it easier and faster for us to fix governments and organizations as well. If you've got a better idea for which economic system we should try to fix first, then please leave a comment below. Happy to discuss any idea that anyone has on how we can actually fix the global economy. But for now, that's it. I'll see you in the next one.